This is an activity called Texts from MathClass. And in this, we use math practice number 2, which is reasoning abstractly and quantitatively. In short, that basically means that proficient mathematicians can turn words into numbers and numbers into words. If you've ever had your students write story problems, you know that that can be challenging sometimes, where they're not sure what information to put in or take out. And this activity uses the same critical thinking and problem solving skills as writing story problems, but it's much more straightforward for students. And so therefore, I think they get more out of it. Basically, in Text from MathClass, we're making sense of an equation. So on the top line of the template, that's like the first line of a text message, you would give the students a complete equation. And after they're good at it, I actually encourage you to give them a choice of 3 equations to put in there, because the more choice they have, the more buy-in they will have to the activity. But it needs to be a full equation with the answer. Doing the math is not the point here. I want students to spend their mental energy understanding what is happening with the math, not calculations. That also means that this activity is more accessible by some of your more struggling students, because they're not having to do the work, they're just having to think about what is happening. So students use that first line of the text message like, hey, they get an equation. And then they follow up with details. A story that reflects the equation. Don't worry, I'll show you some examples here in a second. And the last box is for you or the student to write whatever you want them to write there. There's really no rule. It can be a response from you, or it can be a response that they write themselves. Before we get much farther, I do want to assure you that there's a PDF and PNG version of the phone template available for your use at mathwaysnw.com/downloads. The PDF version has 2 images on a page, so you can print a bunch and slice them up. The PNG version is just one of the phones, and then there's also at that download page a link for a ready-made seesaw activity using this image. So let's look at some examples here. Here's one example. 5 + 4 = 9. This is a great one to introduce the activity to students with. It's pretty clear. So there's 5 birds on the fence, 4 more birds were in the grass. In all, there were 9 birds. So you'll notice I'm telling an entire story that includes the quote-unquote answer. I'm not turning this into a story problem. So I'm making sure that all the numbers in the equation are represented in the text. So the response might be, oh, it must have been a good day for flying. Or I guess maybe not a good day for flying if all of the birds were not in the air. Anyway, here's another one. 5 + 12 × 2 in parentheses = 29. 12 dog owners each brought 2 tennis balls to the dog park. There were 5 tennis balls already there. That made 29 slobbery tennis balls at the dog park. You'll notice that in this text, I actually wrote it in order of operations, but I would not necessarily make my students do that. I would be interested to see if they wrote their stories in order of operations, but I just want to make sure that their story makes sense and matches the equation. So it's okay if they were to say that there were like 5 tennis balls at the dog park and then 12 dog owners each brought 2. It's just very interesting for me to see how students interpret the equation. And the response might be, oh, thanks for the reminder to walk my dog. Here's a couple more examples. 5 × 1 5/10 is 7 5/10. I love doing this with multiplication, especially with decimals and fractions, because it really helps me see if students are understanding that this means 5 copies of 1.5. Because you might have students that can do the math just fine, but if they're not understanding that it's that repeated addition, then this is a very insightful activity. So here's an example. Meryl has 5 cats. Each cat gets 1.5 cups of food per day. She uses 7.5 cups of cat food every day. That's a lot of cats. And here's another one. So often we write equations with the quote-unquote answer at the end, and we forget that that equal sign just means that it's a balance on either side. So sometimes I like to mix them up and do it this way. Again, you'll notice that I've written my text in the order that I read it, but I wouldn't make students necessarily do it that way. I just, again, want their story to match what's happening. So here's my story. There were 97 fifth graders logged on to Zoom because there are usually 100 fifth graders, but 2 of them have internet outages today, and 1 of them can't find their charging cord and ran out of power. And the key to this one, when you write it with the answer first, is that word because you're explaining what is happening after the equal sign. And then the response to this might be 97% is still pretty good. Now, I mentioned earlier that there's a seesaw template that I made that you can download. This is what it looks like. There's nothing special about it, but what you can definitely do is once your students have gotten used to doing the texts, is you can offer 3 text boxes of equations, and they can drag the equation that they choose into that first segment there. So they're choosing the equation that they want to use. Now, before you think that this is just for students who are writing, I want to share some kindergarten examples with you from a school that I worked with. 3 very different students all using the same equation, which was 8 plus 2 equals 10. So this one drew a picture of 8 circles and 2 circles, and then turned and explained it to us and said, this is 8 and 2 more make 10. And we were all, yes, it is. Good job. Here's another student from that same class. Wrote 2 plus 8 equals 10. This one is actually 8 bats hanging upside down on a tree. And you'll notice that that last bat there in the upper left corner has been erased. That's because the student actually drew 11, and I was watching her do this, and what I said to her, because I didn't want to just tell her that she was wrong, right? I needed her to think about it. And so I said, oh, make sure that you label your 8 and your 2. And so when she started counting, that's when she realized that she had one more. And so that's why it's a funny labeling, is that she erased that last one on the top line, which I thought was adorable. But she did label, and she showed those bats. And this is another student from the same class who drew squirrels on a tree. There were 8 squirrels on the trunk of the tree and 2 squirrels on the top, which made 10 squirrels in all. And so it really is accessible by students of all levels. So to get your class on board, this is what I suggest is the classic I do, we do, you do. Model 2 or 3 yourself, and really focus on how to include the answer as part of the story, that you're writing a story situation, not a story problem. Then give everyone the same equation to write their own stories, and then that way they can directly compare their stories with each other because they're all using the same equation. And once you feel that they have a good idea for the activity, that's when you can give them a choice of 3 equations to pick from. I firmly believe that the more choice we can give students, if it doesn't matter to us which of the 3 they pick, then they will buy into the activity more and get more out of it. Go ahead and grab a scratch piece of paper and practice one yourself. You may choose from any of these 3. Feel free to pause the video while you write it. Now ask yourself, did your text end with a question mark? Because if it did, you might have written a story problem instead of a story situation. So make sure that you're telling the entire situation in your text. And that's it. I'm going to put this back up on the screen so you know where to get the downloads. It's the PDF, the PNG, and then like I said, there's also a Seesaw upload. And have fun with it. Feel free to shoot me in line if you have any questions or anything you think we can do differently.